How are we doing, everybody? Welcome into the SFS channel. My name is Gavin, and in this episode, we're going to talk some early Week 15 matchups for 2022 fantasy football, talking through the wide receiver position as I rank my top 30 tiers and rankings for this group of players. We've got ourselves what feels like some really nice depth for this week's games, of course, because bye weeks now, for the first time since week 6, I want to say, are over. So we finally have everyone back to utilize and use for our lineups here. That's going to be huge because it's the first week of your fantasy playoffs most likely, and every win is pivotal because it's win or go home for 99% of us now, unless your playoffs start next week. So here you guys have it. Let's dive right on in and talk through our first tier. All right, let's dive in. So here we go with tier number 1. I always say this in every episode. I don't really care what the order of this first tier is. These guys, every single week, are either in tier 1 or tier 2 if we're being really picky that week. Someone's got a terrible matchup. Whatever the case might be, these guys are basically locks to be studs almost every week. Now, of course, everyone has that minor little slip-up game, but we'll briefly cover the matchups here, talk through some ball. Justin Jefferson fresh off of his franchise record-setting game in terms of receiving yardage in a contest here against Indianapolis is our wide receiver 1 this week. Numeric rankings move left to right. For this week's matchup, Davante Adams against New England is my number 2 Davante here. We will see how Bill Belichick approaches shutting down this Raiders offense. He could potentially double cover Davante a lot here, but he's been facing that for a large portion of his career and is pretty accustomed to beating that coverage. Jamar Chase here at Tampa Bay is my number 3. This Tampa Bay Bucs defense, I talked about this in the running backs episode. Nothing near what they were once. They don't scare me that much. I think that Tampa Bay is definitely an exploitable defense downfield. Jamar Chase gets past people and obviously has a great ceiling every week. Stephon Diggs here versus Miami. This could turn into a shootout. It's at home, though. We'll see what the weather in Orchard Park is. Last week, things looked like it was going to be great, and then it was basically like raining, like slush, and just crappy weather conditions. So you never know what you're going to get from Buffalo. I really wish, this is a really random thought, but dating back to that game that they were going to play, I wish that it was, the 4 feet of snow contest. I forget when that was. It was around Thanksgiving time, but really wish we got to see that game. Regardless, Stephon Diggs here, a little bit of a weather mystery, but of course he's got Josh Allen, obviously a top 5 receiver almost every week. And then A.J. Brown here against Chicago. This is a very exploitable secondary. There is one key big name missing from this tier. We'll talk about him in just a second, but for A.J. Brown, he's been an absolute monster this year, has elevated himself to superstar status. And again, I like the matchup. I think him and Devontae Smith both have chances for really good ceilings here in Week 15. Next up here, tier 2. So Tyreek Hill is the one player that really deserves, if we're being quite honest, and I feel pretty gross having him down here in tier 2, but it has to be mentioned, the fact that obviously you've got a player that sustained an injury at the end of his last game. So whether it was that ankle or that hamstring, it was reported that both were reportedly bothering him, but it was evident he was limping around out there. He was gimpy. He didn't play the last 2-minute drive. I actually won a game by 0.9 points that locked up a number 1 seed for me because of the fact that he wasn't out there. It was incredible luck. Hopefully he's back at full strength this week, but essentially I was doomed had he caught one more pass in that game. And at the end of the day here, this is a guy that is, like I talked about with the weather here, for Tua Tagovailoa and that Bills matchup, you don't know what's going to happen. So I think that also the last 2 weeks we've gotten a little bit more of defensive success against this Miami team. Now for Tyreek Hill, who's an absolute just difference maker. He scores the fumble 6 and then the 60-yard reception touchdown. He's almost impossible to stop, but Buffalo held him to his worst game of the season. And as I said, health is a concern in this game. CeeDee Lamb at Jacksonville this week. CeeDee is an alpha wide receiver 1. Now, he's not the most consistent guy in the world, but he's insanely talented. Dak can give him the ball. It really just comes down to a week-by-week basis here in terms of what he can do. Garrett Wilson, this is a leap for me. This is a spot where I think he can take the jump in this game and get back on track here. Buffalo was a moderate matchup. He struggled. Again, it was poor weather, though. He still exceeded 10 points in half PPR, was very reliable, has had 20 points in 2 of his last 3 games. And he's got Detroit here, a team that just let Justin Jefferson score that franchise record. And Garrett Wilson, a guy who's already got his franchise record for rookie receiving yards, is having himself one heck of a year. I believe he's got 4 offensive rookie of the week for the AFC too. So absolute monster here. Again, very exploitable Detroit secondary. And if Mike White's healthy, that's the key. If he's not and someone else is playing, might back my expectations down a little bit here, even for Joe Flacco, who's been very good for him this year. But in Garrett Wilson we trust here as our wide receiver 8 this week. And then Amon-Ra at the Jets. Again, you don't know what that weather is going to be like outdoors. Jared Goff has struggled outside of his home dome in Ford Field this year. And this is a tough Jets secondary. They've played very good defense. They've put pressure on opposing quarterbacks, rushing throws, playing tight coverage. It's been tough. And again, Jared Goff has not thrived in these circumstances at any point in his career, really, especially with the Lions. So we'll see how that results here to end out our second tier. Into tier 3 now, we've got some pretty large, chunky tiers here, just 7 of them for today's episode. Kicking it off here with Mike Williams and Keenan Allen of the LA Chargers taking on Tennessee this week. If there's anything exploitable about this Tennessee defense, and the Jags exploited a whole lot of it last week, it is that secondary. And for Mike Williams being back in this lineup with a healthy Keenan Allen, you could tell on Sunday night that this Chargers offense looked entirely different than it has all year. They finally have a legitimate vertical threat. Now, they've been using DeAndre Carter, and I really like Josh Palmer, but I don't really feel that's his role here. And they've been using an assortment of other misfits to try and replicate something of their passing game that was in 2021. And it just wasn't getting the job done. And insert these two guys that absolutely carried the load offensively in the passing game for Justin Herbert. Finally, he had some support and some help. He had a boatload of targets for Keenan Allen, big plays made, jump balls down the sideline for Mike, a really impressive backline touchdown reception as well for Williams. This is Keenan actually just got stuffed at the 2-yard line as well. So much stuff to talk through and to basically break down from that game, but feeling good and optimistic about the matchup heading into this week here, and I expect the Chargers to continue their run of success and productivity in the passing game. DK against the San Francisco 49ers here on Thursday Night Football. The only concern for me is the matchup. If San Francisco's defense continues to be stingy as hell and just, shut down offenses like they have done all season, again, they held Seattle to 7 points in their first matchup this season, that's going to be problematic here for DK Metcalf, who has been playing phenomenal football and has absolutely asserted himself as a star alpha wide receiver in this league. But again, the concern for me is the matchup. Jalen Waddle might see some extra targets and run here in this Buffalo matchup, as I talked about. Tyreek's a bit nicked up here, and you've got always that immense and humongous ceiling. Jalen's been having kind of a rough stretch as of late. Hopefully he bounces back in this week's game. DeAndre Hopkins, no more Kyler Murray. That's the reason he's so low on the list today. It's Colt McCoy that's going to be leading the way for this team moving forward. That's obviously the biggest thing to break down. They're at Denver as well, so he'll see his fair share of Patrick Surtain in this matchup. Overall, Denver's defense is really solid. This could be a very low-scoring game as well. And then T. Higgins. T is interesting here because he had 1 snap in the win this past week for the Cincinnati Bengals. Who knows if he'll be healthy? He's considered day-to-day, as is Tyler Boyd right now. Obviously, it would be a huge jump for Jamar Chase if both of these guys are out, or even if just T. Higgins is out of the lineup. But in terms of target volume and just having a lack of competition on the roster for opportunities. But at the end of the day here, for T. Higgins, he should be a high-level wide receiver too if he's healthy. If he's not, which hamstrings can be a little bit of a bugger here, you could see some struggling performances out of T if he is limited in practice significantly and not necessarily showing you the results you want to see by the end of this week. All right, next up here, tier 4. So we've got Tyler Lockett and Terry McLaurin. Both of these players are really, really solid. Now, I don't know if they quite have the juice to get to some of the ceiling numbers that essentially everyone in the tier above, except for maybe a Keenan Allen or potentially T. Higgins, could get to, but I really like these players. Tyler Lockett's been fantastic all year, just 3 games under 10 fantasy points. He has been the absolute epitome of a consistency king and what it means to have a safe floor in fantasy football this year, much to my surprise, and it's been awesome to watch here. San Francisco is a matchup that, despite the potential scariness of it, he had 100 yards plus against on 11 targets in week 2, and as I said, has been very consistent every week since. Then you've got Terry McLaurin coming off of a 20-point game against the Giants, again in Week 13. You had the bye week in Week 14, then you play him again here in Week 15. For McLaurin, it was 12 targets, 105 yards on 8 receptions, and a touchdown in that prior matchup. He could absolutely do something similar this week. or because of the quarterback play, Taylor Heineke is, he tends to produce boom-bust scoring production for his receivers. All right, I was actually wrong at the top of today's episode. We've got 8 tiers for today's video, so I just popped that one down there. For tier 5, though, it's Brandon Ayuk, it's Chris Godwin, it's Christian Kirk. Starting out with Ayuk, I loved the opportunity for added work in this game. No Deebo Samuel, of course, the MCL and ankle issue. He's expected to be out 3 weeks here. This week, though, plenty of opportunities close to the line of scrimmage, getting him out in space and running downfield. He had 2 catches on 3 targets for 57 yards and a touchdown in his first game with Brock Purdy. Of course, it was a busted coverage, and he gets deep, running a pretty solid route on a little stutter step there, and scores that touchdown. But he should see more opportunity, more work, more volume, therefore having a better floor in this game. The ceiling is always just phenomenal because he's very good after the catch. Chris Godwin here, I'm expecting a somewhat respectable level recovery from Tampa's offense. Now, this is not your 2020 or 2021 Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense, but what it is still an insanely high passing volume team, so you're going to see a lot of targets head Godwin's direction. And this Bengals defense is without their top pass rusher. Their secondary is a bit beat up as well. Nice opportunity for Godwin. Christian Kirk against Dallas. They're going to need points here. It's as plain as simple as that. He charts to be the wide receiver 1 every single week for Jacksonville in terms of overall volume and opportunity. We'll see if he can deliver. The Cowboys have lost a lot of guys in the back end, so as long as Trevor Lawrence has time to throw the football, he should get some quality looks. All right, we've got some young players up here in Tier 6, starting with Devontae Smith, going back to that Chicago matchup for Philadelphia. I love that. Devontae Smith's been running great routes, cooking guys all year long, being a fantastic field stretcher. He's done some really nice things for this Eagles team. We will see. However, it comes down to volume and overall target quality. Wow, I really messed that one up there. But essentially here, Devontae Smith is an incredibly talented player. He gets single coverage basically every snap because you've got A.J. Brown across the side of the field. So really, really great opportunity for efficiency for him every single play. Chris Olave's got Atlanta this week, one of the best matchups for opposing fantasy wide receivers. Week 1, the numbers don't really indicate anything too important because he hadn't broken out yet. What you're hoping for here, though, is some deep passes from Andy Dalton and the opportunity for some big playmaking downfield. And then Christian Watson, he's got the Rams this week. Christian Watson, 8 touchdowns in 4 games. Hopefully the bye week didn't cool him off here. There is Jalen Ramsey on the other side of the field, but as we've covered throughout the season, he's been absolutely getting burnt and cooked all season long. And then the other corners for this team, I talked about this in the must-start episode this week, are extremely undersized. So a 6'4" guy that flies down the field with 4.3 speed in Christian Watson is a very, very big talent and size and speed mismatch for those players. So interesting stuff there. Lots of ceiling in this 6th tier. Tier 7 here, I've got Amari Cooper kicking things off against Baltimore. Now, each of the first 2 weeks have been a little shaky for Deshaun Watson. In addition to that, Amari Cooper's been banged up a little bit, which doesn't help the scenario at all. So I have to lower my expectations for him a little bit. His ceiling is still very high, but we've seen the floor be lower. He's not getting targeted at the same rate, which could be a health thing, could be a quarterback chemistry thing. We'll see. Hopefully he gets on track here, makes some plays. Hopefully that hip is a little bit healed up this week and ready to go. But it was evident at certain times in the game last week that things just weren't clicking 100%. That's why we saw DPJ, who narrowly misses the tiers today. I think he's actually my wide receiver 31, so missing it by 1 spot, is producing at a 100-plus yard clip last week. Next up, Juju at Houston this week. He's a run-after-catch phenom. He's been very good, incorporated fantastically into this Chiefs offense. I'm confident in him as a flex play this week. It seems kind of low to have him at the wide receiver 24 spot, so technically I've got him as a lower-end wide receiver 2, but at the end of the day, we'll see what happens here. This could be a situation like last week where the Chiefs get up big and then screw around, turn the ball over, and things get shaky, and Juju made some nice plays down the stretch last week. But yeah, we'll see how things shake out here. I like his floor with the volume he's been getting out of that slot role. And then Michael Pittman, love him on the perimeter as a boundary receiver against Minnesota this week. I think there's an opportunity for an elevated floor. His ceiling still isn't great, but I do think that he can come out here and produce top 30 numbers. Of course, that's why he's in the rankings today. I've got him as my wide receiver 25 and be a dependable flex option for leagues this week. All right, our receivers 27 to 30 now, starting with Mike Evans, who I have been talking through the last few weeks, is shooting down my rankings. I am extremely pessimistic on good old Mike here after what's been kind of some tough, stretches of months, really, not weeks. It's been months of down performances for Mike Evans, lack of productivity. Now, he's kind of gotten screwed a few times by Tom Brady, who A, missed on a touchdown this past week, B, a penalty, called back another score, and then C, he dropped a walk-in 75-yarder against the Panthers. That was well over a month ago now, but the last scoring opportunity that comes to mind. So there's been some missing points for Mike Evans. It sucked to see it against Cincinnati. He's maybe got an opportunity here, but we'll see what happens since he doesn't really have too many big corners. They do have Eli Apple, which is funny as always if you guys remember last season and all of the flack that he got. So for Mike Evans here, I've lowered my expectations. The floor is not very great. We'll see how he produces here. The volume has consistently been there. The productivity is absolutely not. Jerry Jeudy against the Cardinals, as we talked about earlier, there may be a situation. Actually, I think I covered this in the running backs video, which I just recorded before this. However, with Russ in concussion protocol, we might see Brett Rippon start this game. It's on the table. We'll say that. Cortland Sutton also, we don't know about his health. Obviously, if he's not out there, that probably benefits Jeudy in terms of targets. He got his first 3-touchdown game, a hat trick last week. 2 of those 3 scores, though, were with Russ under center. Hollywood Brown, similar situation, lost his quarterback this week. That's really the only reason he's so low on the tiers list this week. And with Colt McCoy, we'll see what happens. Hollywood did drop 2 pivotal passes, one of them being a 4th down conversion. It was deep downfield, could have made a big splash impact for his team. We'll see how that trust translates with Colt here. Again, after having some blunders, they do have the Denver Broncos, they are on the Denver Broncos matchup, so the other side of that game. And that is obviously a respectable defense. So you'd expect to see either Surtain covering Hopkins or Brown, because I believe he just sticks to one side of the field. And obviously that'll draw some respectable coverage for him half the time or so. Hollywood was working in the slot last week, though, so I guess it technically depends if they're playing zone or man. And then here for Deontay Johnson at the number 30 spot at Carolina. I think that if Mitchell Trubisky is the quarterback, this especially benefits Deontay over Pickens. It causes Pickens' weekly stock to fall here. But Mitch has preferred Deontay. And as we've seen, Kenny Pickett gives a little bit more love to George Pickens while he can produce, hopefully, for both of them. But essentially here against Carolina, it's an exploitable matchup. We saw both DK and Tyler Lockett get some work last week from Seattle. I would expect that this Pittsburgh offense, aside from Deontay Johnson and Najee Harris, is pretty quiet this week. Again, with Kenny in concussion protocol, it is kind of a toss-up as to who's going to start this week. But I am assuming, because again, the league's been very, very cautious with concussions since the Tua stuff, both for Russ and Jerry Jeudy, and for in this game here with Kenny Pickett and Mitchell Trubisky and Deontay Johnson. I think that they will most likely rule out the starters and put the quarterbacks in a position for long-term health and longevity here. So there you guys have it, my top 30 wide receiver tiers and rankings for Week 15, Round 1 of the Fantasy Playoffs. It's early in the week. This stuff's going to change. We're going to get new information. We're going to get new stuff to analyze throughout the stretch run of Week 15 here. So stay tuned for all that stuff. Join the community Discord server. Turn the bell on so you're notified whenever I come out with new information, because that is the best way to obviously see my updated takes when things occur and happen here. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. I will see you in a future episode. Our running backs tiers episode is out today as well. I mentioned that a few times in today's video. But if you haven't checked it out, go do so. It's live on the channel right now, and I'll see you there. Peace out.